Direct Vocabulary Instruction by Tara Hudlow. I chose to complete my research over the use of direct vocabulary instruction to improve literacy. Vocabulary is a very important part of reading fluently. Children begin developing their vocabulary at a very young age. When children begin school, some have already developed an extensive vocabulary. According to research, children from high-income families typically have a more developed vocabulary than children from low-income families. This means that we need to provide more vocabulary instruction to students in order to shrink that gap. Vocabulary instruction in the primary grades will increase fluency. By increasing fluency, students can build greater comprehension skills. In order to comprehend what they are reading, students have to be given the tools to understand what the words are saying. The question I used to guide my research was, will direct vocabulary instruction increase students' fluency and comprehension? This study took place in a small, rural Missouri town. The study was conducted with 28 first grade students in 2 different classrooms. Classroom A had 13 students, 10 boys and 3 girls. Classroom B had 14 students, 9 boys and 5 girls. What did this study look like? Data was collected over the course of 3 literacy units. Each unit had specific vocabulary words related to the literacy unit. Classroom A received direct vocabulary instruction. In Classroom A, students were introduced to new vocabulary words at the beginning of each unit. Throughout that unit, students were given opportunities and activities to practice their vocabulary words. In Classroom B, students were given the same vocabulary words. However, they weren't given the same opportunities to practice and use the words throughout the literacy unit. Teachers then collected data from both units for comparison. Direct vocabulary instruction activities. The teacher of Classroom A provided her students with different opportunities to practice their new vocabulary words. One of those activities was a vocabulary journal. In the vocabulary journal students they recorded vocabulary words with the meanings and the connections they made to their new vocabulary words. Another way they practiced their vocabulary words was through a vocabulary word wall. This vocabulary word wall had all of the vocabulary words for each unit with the words' meanings. Students could also help add meanings to the wall when words were introduced. By letting students give their own input on vocabulary meanings, the teacher can see what previous knowledge the students had about the words that they were learning. And finally, students were also asked to set their own goals. Students would set their own individual goals for each literacy unit. And then they would have meetings with their teacher to discuss how they did and what they can do to meet their goals. What data was collected? Teachers collected data from pre- and post-tests for all 3 literacy units. After each pre- and post-test, the teachers compiled their students' scores. After compiling student scores, the teachers looked at student mean scores. The student mean scores allowed teachers to develop a class average for comparison. They also looked at the mode of student scores. Looking at the mode of student scores allowed the teachers to see what the most common score on the assessment was. And finally, the teachers looked at the range of student scores. The range of student scores was most interesting to look at between pre- and post-test scores. One of the biggest ranges of student scores was a 10-point increase between the pre-test of Unit 1 and the post-test of Unit 1. This student was in Classroom A. Some of the most important data that the teachers looked at were the mean scores of the post-tests for Literacy Unit 1, 2, and 3. The teachers compared mean test scores throughout all 3 literacy units. The table above shows the scores throughout all 3 units. Classroom A received higher scores on all 3 units, receiving an 18, a 16, and a 19. However, you will notice that Classroom B received a very close score to Classroom A on Unit 2. On Unit 2, Classroom A received a mean score of 16, and Classroom B received a mean score of 15.5. So only a 0.5 gap between those two. The teachers found this very interesting. Findings of the study. After looking at the mean scores on the last slide, you can see that the study cannot definitively say that direct vocabulary instruction improves student fluency and comprehension. However, in the case of this study, Classroom A did score higher on all 3 units than Classroom B did. And Classroom A students did all improve their scores throughout each unit. Classroom B scores fluctuated a little bit more. What happens next? From this study, Classroom A and Classroom B teachers know that direct vocabulary instruction did help their students improve their reading scores. They will now both implement this practice into their classroom. They will both use a lot of the same strategies and activities for the next few units, and then they will compare their scores again. They're really excited to compare their scores once they're both using the same kind of instruction, just to see if the scores are more comparable than they were in this study. Thank you for watching my video.